Hello and welcome to Occupied Thoughts, a podcast brought to you by the Foundation for Middle East Peace, FMEP. I'm Peter Beinart, a non-resident fellow at FMEP. Today is Tuesday, December 17th, 2024, and I'm happy to be here with Maha Yahya. Maha is director of the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Middle East Center, where her work focuses broadly on political violence and identity politics, pluralism, development, and social justice after the Arab uprisings, the challenges of citizenship, and the political and socioeconomic implications of the migration refugee crisis. Prior to joining Carnegie, Maha worked for the UN in several capacities, including in Lebanon. She's also a writer, most recently publishing the book Unheard Voices, What Syrian Refugees Need to Return Home. I'm very, very grateful to her for talking with me in the wake of the really extraordinary developments that have been happening in Syria. Maha, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here.
So maybe you can just talk a little bit about, before we talk about the geopolitics and the future of the government in Syria, just at a human level, what it has been like for you, who knows Syria very well, watching the fall of this regime and the reaction among Syrians to its fall.
Pure joy. And there's no other word to describe it. The idea that this regime, after 54 years of absolute horror, has eventually fallen in such a short period of time. And the regime that's not only responsible for the deaths of 500,000 Syrians, for the catastrophe that has befallen the country, but as we're now seeing emerging from its own gulags, its own prisons, for some of the most horrific atrocities one can imagine. So I think there is it's been pure elation, especially as I watch my Syrian friends who have been have been trying to advise against the normalization with a regime like this. There was, as you know, a push to normalize, to say, including us, to say you cannot normalize with such a regime. This does away with all notions of security, of justice, of accountability. Effectively, it would keep Syria as an epitome and as an epicenter of instability in the region. Now, of course, with this joy, there's a lot of trepidation and concern in terms of what the next steps are. The path towards a prosperous Syria is littered with challenges, opportunities for sure. It's a major opportunity to carve out a new Syria by Syrians, but there's also multiple challenges.
So maybe we can, before we talk about that, we can just help us understand a little bit about why this collapse took place so suddenly, or apparently so suddenly. You were mentioning normalization. My understanding was that actually regimes in the region were moving towards normalizing with Syria. There was an acceptance that Assad had won this war. Most people, certainly in the United States, were not paying very much attention, thought that the thing was kind of frozen. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like, again, things move very, very quickly. So maybe you can help us understand what it was. Maybe there were things that were already happening under the surface that we were not aware of, but that all of a sudden triggered this rapid collapse.
Well, I mean, it's a number of things. One, if you look at the borders of Syria, we had just actually put out a report literally a few weeks earlier about Syria and its borders. And it's an accumulation of work we've been doing for a while. And it clearly showed the extent to which the Assad regime was simply not in control of its borders. It cannot. I used to joke and say it can barely control Damascus. We discovered it couldn't control Damascus even. So one, there was the the total fragmentation. Its Turkish borders are a zone of influence between the Turks, HTS, and the Kurds.
Maybe just say, for those who are not following, what HTS is.
Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is the outfit of Julani, who led basically the charge that brought about the downfall of Assad. And they are he is a former Qaeda. HTS, as it's known by its acronym, is on the wanted list. They've been listed as a terrorist organization. He himself has also been listed. So this is just, and they had connections to ISIS as well. In the southern part of Syria, that was a zone of influence between the Jordanians, the Israelis, the Iranians, the Russians to a more limited degree. So you had different, if you want, competing interests along these border areas. Go to the borders with Iraq and Syria, some of those were literally in Iranian zone of influence. And what I think now has become famous, the Bukamal crossing, was the major crossing point for arms and narcotic shipments from Iran and from Syria to other parts of the region, but from Iran to its various partners and proxies in the region. So it was clear that the regime in Damascus did not have control over its territory nor over its borders. Its governance modality was very tailored. It was not the same way. They didn't govern all of Syria in the same way. Rather, in some places, the relationship between the central state and the province was through a local war gangs. Sometimes it's local notables, sometimes it's the municipal council. It was a very fragmented operation. That's one. The second, the economic situation in Syria had gotten a lot worse. Poverty was something like 90%, 80 to 90%. The purchasing power of Syrians had plummeted, ordinary Syrians. Salaries had practically disappeared. We were seeing demonstrations over the past 2 years in regime-supported areas. I mean, areas that actually supported the regime, this Assad regime. They were demonstrating, in protest of the decline in their socioeconomic conditions. We were seeing civil servants demonstrate. So there was a broad sense of discontent across the country, whether it was regime-held or non-regime held or somewhere in between. And then I think the third element, and this is the surprising element, none of us realized the extent to which the Syrian army had been hollowed out. I think for me, that was the biggest element of surprise. That Iran had been weakened, we were aware of that in 2013, when the rebel push against Bashar al-Assad and his forces happened, the big push. It was the intervention of Hezbollah directly in the conflict on the side of Bashar al-Assad that saved the regime at the time. And then in 2015, it was complemented by the Russian, if you recall, the barrel bombs they used to drop. Mass aerial campaigns are conducted by the Russian army and military and the Syrian military. So both Iran and Syria had been weakened. Iran, in part, Hezbollah was no longer able to play the role it had after the war in Lebanon and what the country had been going through over the past year. And we can speak in a bit more detail later if you like. But also Russia, with its preoccupation in Ukraine, it was clear that its positions in Syria had not been hollowed out, but had been trimmed down significantly. But the army itself, the Syrian army, we thought they would put up some sort of a fight. And I don't think any of us realized the extent to which that had totally disintegrated. So when Aleppo fell, my understanding is that, Joulani was there on some sort of an exploratory mission around Aleppo to see if they could test the boundaries. They saw this as an opening. What they did not expect was that Aleppo would fall so quickly. And when that happened, they moved on to the major provinces, Hama and Homs. The one thing they did, which I thought was quite smart on their part, is that they worked with locals. So the rebels that took Hama or Homs were people from Hama and from Homs. which also made the fall much faster. The South, there's the Southern Council that was reconstituted, made of different military groups in the south of Syria that moved to overtake the South. There were even towns and villages that were literally being overtaken by their citizens. It wasn't even a rebel force coming in and taking over. So to my mind, this fall of Assad is really a Syrian achievement. Julani is the face of it, or Ahmad al-Shara, as he is now likes to be called. He is the face of that achievement, but it was a collective effort by Syrians across the country. The Kurds took part. I mean, they were the ones who took Deir ez-Zor and Bukamal in the north and northeast, and then handed them over. So many Syrians of all walks of life took part in this. And I think this is what poses now the big challenge moving forward, because while Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is the face and the main political / military entity in control of this political transition, it also does not control the terrain, nor does it control all the different groups that took part in this, I would say, major achievement for Syrians.
Right. And so there's been a lot of discussion in the United States since Assad's fall about the nature of HTS, to what degree it is still an Islamist or even jihadist organization, whether it's authoritarian. What is your understanding of its kind of evolution, and what would you expect in terms of its attitude towards governance?
Look, there's a major rebranding effort of HTS going on now, and I think we need to kind of watch that space, as they say. I have a lot of concerns. Yes, in HTS and Idlib did a great job at governing Idlib. They created a local political economy. There was a provision of services. We were hearing when Aleppo fell, the first thing people were talking about, that electricity was there 24 hours. So they've demonstrated that they're able to govern a region or a town. Governing a country is a completely different ballgame altogether. And I think we need to really keep our eyes on the ball there. And this is what I'm saying. I mean, right now, what they've done is they've literally taken those that were responsible for the governance of Idlib and placed them in Damascus. So that's one question. For me, there are other questions as well related to how inclusive they will be. The political transition in Syria has kind of 4 parts, or should have 4 parts. One is the political aspect of it, and this is where you need representation from a very different groups of Syrians, both inside Syria but also outside Syria, that represent different communities. I know there's been a focus on the question of minorities, ethnic and sectarian minorities. I don't like that word. I prefer to talk about the diverse ethnic tapestry of ethnic and sectarian communities in Syria. You need to have representation of regions and of the different, both armed and non-armed groups that can help put together a vision for a new Syria. Is HTS capable of doing that? I have concerns. Right now, what they've done, as I said, they've taken the modernist governor of Idlib, imposed it on Damascus. This is supposed to last till March, when they're going to put together a government for a political transition. But the contours of that government, the new government, we don't know. Who's going to select the members of this government? We're not sure. The second element of this that I think is of major concern is the security. Right now, you have a security vacuum. HTS has moved into that vacuum, but we don't see yet a roadmap for how the security services are going to be dealt with, how the army is going to be dealt with. are we going to see a de-Baathification and the same of what we saw in Iraq, which would be disastrous for Syria? Today, many of the internal security forces, members of the army, are literally either sitting at home or displaced. So there are lots of questions in terms of how this is going to be dealt with. And again, you cannot have one party deal with this question and kind of fill up the vacuum, the political vacuum and the security vacuum at the same time. The third question to my mind is the civil service and what will happen at the level of the civil service. Again, what will happen to those members who belong to the Ba'ath Party and to Bashar al-Assad's network, if you like. I think that's another file. And how do you maintain services? Syrian institutions had really, I don't want to say disintegrated, but had really been weakened by the conflict, by the mass displacement. Let's not forget there are 6.7 million Syrians displaced inside of Syria, and then another 6 million outside of Syria, brain drain, I mean, you name it. So there's been a real weakening of these institutions. What will happen at that level? What is the roadmap for rebuilding Syria's institutions and ensuring they're the ones who take charge in terms of the delivery of services? The last thing you want is to recreate a parallel network of cronies belonging to this party or that party. And then the fourth file is the transitional justice. And I think this has become even more important in view of the horrors we're seeing emerge in a post-Assad Syria. I think they just discovered a mass grave this morning. They're saying there are about 100,000 people there. We don't know. But it's almost since the fall of Assad, it's been almost every day. Well, not every day, but there is a continuous discovery of new mass graves. Other than the horrors we've seen in Sidnaya, what is being reported, the Caesar photos, which we had seen before. So there is a need for to start thinking about what a transitional justice system would look like in Syria. Already we're hearing about vengeance killings. People want revenge in many instances for their loved ones. So there are instances happening, public executions, which tells you that, again, HTS is not able to control the ground fully.
Right.
But I think a mechanism needs to be put in place also for that. And these are four urgent trajectories that have to move in parallel at the same time.
Yeah, because you mentioned this question of reprisals and transitional justice. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about, you see, the Assad family came from the Alawite community, and I obviously don't want to suggest that all Alawites were kind of monolithic in their views or that they were all supportive of Assad, but I would imagine that in that community in particular, and maybe some other minority communities, you can tell me that might have been a little bit more supportive of Assad, that there might be a fear of being targeted now as being associated with the regime. I wonder if you can have a talk about what the feeling is like in those communities and how much of a danger there is of this reprisal against entire regions or communities that are perceived as having supported the old regime.
Look, I can only relay what I'm hearing, and what I'm hearing is there is a lot of concern. Then it's mainly the Christian and the Alawite communities, because Assad did cast himself as a protector of these groups. So there is concern within them. But we already saw in Aleppo the messaging, and again, HTS was quite savvy in this. The messaging they were sending out to all communities as they were, taking over, is we're not going after communities as communities. There was even messaging with the Iranians to tell them we're not going after Shia shrines, whether Sayyidi Zainab or even Shia communities. There was messaging with the Russians even around the Russian bases. So one of the things they did in Aleppo, it was very clear immediately, we're not going after, Aleppo has a sizable Armenian Christian community. And on the contrary, what I'm hearing from friends who are in Damascus or in other places, there are Christmas trees. So when we at this point, we're not seeing reprisals at the level of communities. However, there is significant concern, there is significant fear. About 25,000 Syrians have already fled to Lebanon because they're worried about what could come next. Most likely, some of them are regime affiliated, but I doubt that all of them are refugee. Obviously, not all Alawites supported the regime.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of uncertainty at this moment, and this is why an inclusive political transition is incredibly important to kind of pull this together.
Can you talk about Turkey's role in this and what Turkey's relationship with HTS is?
Well, Turkey has long been a supporter of HTS. HTS has their own agency. They are not a lackey only of Turkey, as sometimes they're depicted. They have their own agency. They have their own independent sources of finance. They really created a political economy within Idlib. One cannot deny that. Levied fines, fees, taxes, you name it. So, but Turkey has played historically and continues to play an important role in providing both political support as well as training and other kinds of logistical support to HTS. Today, the perception is Turkey has won in Syria and Iran and Russia have lost. They are playing an incredibly, I think they have, because today HTS does need the political support of not only neighboring countries, but also internationally. Turkey plays a very important role and can help HTS both moderate and steer its vision and its approach towards this political transition in Syria. HTS needs Turkey as an interlocutor with much of the outside world as well. I mean, a lot of them are going to HTS now. We've heard the French have met, Geir Pedersen, the UN Special Envoy, met with them. Everyone is now flocking to Damascus to speak to the new sheriffs in town. But they still they will need more and more Turkey's support, I think, in that respect, and will rely, I suspect, to some extent on advice also from Erdogan. If they can model Syria as a Syrian version of the Turkish rule, then we'll see. That could be one trajectory that we might see develop. Qatar also, by the way, has moved into that space and is also providing logistical and other support to HTS. They've had a relationship with them before. I don't know how close the coordination between Turkey and Qatar is, but there is some coordination happening also in that space.
So interesting. So Qatar has a stronger, perhaps more influence at this point than the Saudis or the Emiratis. I wonder why of the Gulf countries, Qatar in particular?
Well, Qatar has had a relationship with HTS in the past. The Saudis have really, and they didn't really move out of, if you want, quote unquote, from Syria over the past decade. Whereas Saudi Arabia initially supported some of the rebel groups and at a certain moment decided, you know what, this is a losing battle and a losing game, and withdrew all of the financial support that it had provided at a certain moment to some of the rebel groups that had emerged. So I think Saudi Arabia's importance today is both in its political weight. It's Saudi Arabia. It can bring a lot of, and also in its economic weight, and whether it's willing to provide support and funding for the reconstruction of Syria, which is also something that is badly needed.
What do you think? There's been a lot of speculation about what a new regime's relationship, attitude towards Israel might be. I'm curious what you think it might be, and also what the impact on inside Syria and on Syrian politics is going to be of what Israel has done since Assad's fall, moving its troops further in to Syrian territory, and also this bombing campaign against Syrian military targets.
Look, I think it's too soon to tell. I mean, I'll say when the spokesperson for HTS was asked about this, he would not comment, and he said we're going to focus on rebuilding Syria. Jolani said, well, there's no need anymore for Israel to be present in Syria. Iran is out already. So he's framed it in the sense of Iran is gone, there's no need for you to be there. And
right.
Essentially what Israel has done is they've moved into Syria, they've created a buffer zone to protect another buffer zone, to protect the occupied territory. Right. So they've occupied now Mount Hermon, they're talking about almost 25 to 30 kilometers. We heard that there was some sort of a raid near Damascus, where Israeli soldiers were on the ground and then for 20 minutes and out again. So attitudes towards Syria, I think, and the occupation of Syrian land, we also have to wait and see. This will depend on what the transitional government, we have a year of at least political transition, if not longer, what they will be able to do. So until Syria stabilizes as such, there is anger amongst Syrians. They understand that Israel has taken the opportunity to do a land grab, but they know also there's very little they can do about it right now if there isn't international support to push back against this. And it's, by the way, I mean, Turkey has done something not similar, but there are also concerns that there are areas that Turkey has sway over in the northeast. And again, that also is becoming an element of contention, if you like. But I think these are problems for down the road in the perspective of Syrians. The Israel one will be a much hotter issue than the Turkey one, given who's sitting in the seat of power today in Damascus, and also because of fears that even though Israel is saying this is a temporary occupation, as we've seen from other experiences with Israel, what begins as temporary has a tendency to last for tens and tens of years, if not longer.
Yeah. What about the Kurds in Syria? What is the relationship between the Kurdish rebel groups and HTS? Do the Kurds in Syria have ambitions for independence, or are they looking for some kind of autonomy? What do you think they're hoping comes out of this new constellation for them?
I think what they would like is to maintain some sort of not autonomy, but self-governance of their regions. But I don't think they've made clear they're not looking for autonomy. They're not looking to to break away from Syria. They want to remain within a greater Syria. And this is, again, one of the options that we may see moving forward, discussions of a more federal system in Syria, where you can govern as if in a federation of different regions, rather than the highly centralized mode that Assad was employing. The same would be, the milder version of that would be a kind of a broad decentralization that is already included anyway in the Syrian constitution. So I think for the Kurds, what they're looking for is some sort of self-governance under a broader Syrian framework. The question is, this is a big no-no for Turkey. They consider Kurdish presence there a threat to their own national security. We're already seeing them push. They have proxy forces in the region, and some of these proxy forces have already attacked the area of Manbij and are trying to push the Kurdish forces out of these areas. This was expected. Now we're hearing that Turkey is amassing some troops and getting ready for a bigger incursion into Kurdish areas. I think they would like to do away with this question once and for all.
The Turks would.
The Turks would, and from their perspective, and perhaps engineer some sort of a resolution that would not, in their mind, be a threat to their own national security. The main issue for them is the link to the Kurdistan party, which they consider a terrorist organization.
Right. So their goal is to not allow any Kurdish self-government in Syria and to have them ruled by others?
What they would say is they will allow a self-governance in Syria, or some sort of, not autonomy, but yes, some sort of self-governance within a broader decentralized framework, so long as it's not, or it's led by Kurds that are acceptable to them, and Arabs, because the area is not purely Kurdish. The area is a mix of Arabs and Kurds. Right. In terms of ethnicity.
Yeah. Maha, thank you. This was very, very informative. I really appreciate it.
No, pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to this episode of Occupied Thoughts. Please make sure to check out the FMEP website, fmep.org, for resources related to this podcast and lots of other rich content related to Palestine and Israel. And please make sure you are subscribed to this podcast to stay up to date. You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Spotify, and you can also watch video versions of our podcast, including this one on YouTube. And with that, I'm Peter Beinart signing off until the next episode of FMEP's Occupied Thoughts.